Hi guys, it's Claire. Welcome back. Today I wanted to talk to you about some of my favorite sad love stories, and I was inspired to make this video by a book that I just finished reading that is one of the most devastating love stories I've ever read, and it really reminded me of how much I love stories about doomed love or unrequited love. I think those are the books that just leave a kind of persistent ache, and I think that books about disappointments in life are some of the most real and raw and resonant kinds of books. So I'm going to start off with the books that are about merely disappointments in love, and then move into the sad and sometimes truly tragic love stories, and then finally end with the gut-punching, heart-wrenching book that inspired this whole video. So grab a pint of Ben & Jerry's and let's get started. First up is The Idiot by Elif Batuman, and this coincidentally was just longlisted for the Women's Prize, and perhaps it's a bit odd to classify this as a love story because it is above all a coming-of-age story that follows Ceylin, who's a Turkish-American girl just starting her freshman year at Harvard. But a lot of her coming of age has to do with her falling in love for the first time. And unfortunately, the guy who she falls in love with is this senior named Ivan, who's in one of her Russian classes, and he is unavailable both in the sense that he's emotionally withholding and also in the sense that he already has a girlfriend. So this is very much a one-sided, very cerebral love affair that, to top it all off, is conducted primarily through these very lengthy email exchanges. And what I love about this book is that Ceylin is a very awkward, inexperienced, at times overly intellectual protagonist who feels a lot of things intensely and can express them through writing and words, but then doesn't know how to express them physically or externally. She doesn't know what she's doing. She's very awkward and uncomfortable in her own body, and she doesn't know how to make someone want to kiss her, or on a more existential level, she doesn't know how to make someone love her back. And however frustrating and confusing this non-relationship is, it still means something to her, which makes it all the more frustrating that on the other side of it, Ivan is investing all this time in her and writing her these long emails, but at the same time refusing to acknowledge any of its significance. And so this whole book is suffused with this sort of agonizing ambiguity and confusion, both for Ceylin and for you as the reader. But I think it really captures the tentative and fumbling and at times blockheaded quality of young love. And it really captures in a way that is at times painfully recognizable how horrible it feels to be the person who cares more. Next up is Walker Brothers' Cowboy, which is a short story written by Alice Munro. This story is only about 16 pages long, and it's set in the 1930s in rural Canada, and it follows a young protagonist whose father works for the Walker Brothers Company, which basically means that he goes around the back country door to door selling drugstore type goods. And so one day she and her younger brother tag along while her father makes his Walker Brothers rounds, and at one point they stop at a house outside his territory and pay an unexpected visit to a woman named Nora. And Nora is this unmarried, hardy, self-sufficient woman living alone with her elderly mother. And it quickly becomes apparent that at some point in their youth, the narrator's father and Nora were romantically involved, and they haven't seen each other now for many years. So now the narrator's father has just shown up at the house of this old flame with his two young children in tow, kind of as evidence of the fact that he's married and living this completely different life now. And they all spend this strange hour or so together at Nora's house, and it's all very pleasant and cordial, but underneath it all, there's this tension. And Alice Munro is such a subtle and masterful writer, and she's able to convey through the smallest details and gestures all of the history and regret and disappointment that exists between the narrator's father and Nora. And this story is really about sort of the meaning of the passage of time and what kind of marks people from the past leave on our lives. And it's just really quiet and really sad, and I love it. It's one of my favorite short stories. And I did find a scan of the PDF online that I'm going to link down below if you want to check it out. Next up is Villette by Charlotte Brontë. And as some of you may know, this is my favorite Victorian novel, and it's also one of my favorite novels of all time. And one of the reasons for that is that it contains one of the most beautifully crafted and resonant depictions of unrequited love that I've ever read. And this is a book about Lucy Snow, who is a very plain-looking, quiet, sort of invisible woman who has no means and no connections in life. And she starts working at a school for girls and soon falls in love with the incredibly charming and handsome young doctor in town. And you know from the outset that it is never going to happen between Lucy and Dr. John. That is painfully apparent. But they do end up becoming really good friends. And it's incredibly difficult and poignant to watch Lucy become more and more attached to this person who is out of her league, but who she still has really strong feelings for nonetheless. And I think it's a really interesting and moving depiction of a woman who is disregarded and ignored by so much of society, and who society doesn't really deem to be worthy of having romantic feelings, let alone romantic hopes. But she is still very much a flesh and blood person who has intense passions and feelings and heartbreaking disappointments just like anyone else. Great book. I really recommend it. Moving away from the disappointments in love and unrequited love section of this list into the tragedy with a capital T portion of our program, next up I have Tin Man by Sarah Winman. And this book was incredibly popular on BookTube last year, and it focuses on the relationship between a man named Michael, a man named Ellis, and Ellis's wife Annie. What makes it complicated is that Ellis and Michael have been very close friends since they were about 12, and for a brief period in their young adulthood, they were something more than friends, although what that thing was never really defined. And what I love about this book is that it examines love and friendship and the ambiguities that can exist in relationships that aren't easy to categorize. And this book is sad on so many levels, but I found the relationship between Michael and Ellis to be particularly moving, because here you have two people who care about each other so much, but who don't always love each other in the way that the other person wants to be loved. And these are also two people who don't always know how to express or articulate how important that other person is to them. And this book is just really heavy with the weight of things left unsaid. And it feels very true to life and is a brutal reminder about how so many of us don't say what we mean until it's too late and until time has run out. Next up, I have Moonlight Shadow, which is a short story written by Banana Yoshimoto, and this is usually included in English editions of her most famous novella, Kitchen. And this short story is one of the saddest and most quietly gutting things that I've ever read. It follows a young woman in her early 20s whose boyfriend of several years has just been killed in an accident, and it follows her as she tries to navigate her grief. And what's so sparkling and also so sad about this book is that it captures the lightness and the romance of first love and young love, but it also captures the earth-shattering quality of first loss and how your first significant encounter with death, especially when it's the death of another young person, can really knock your world off its axis. And Banana Yoshimoto has a very light touch in this story, and the simplicity of her prose allows her to tell these kind of basic truths about loss and grief, but she also weaves these kind of magical elements into her otherwise very straightforward storytelling, and the combination of those things allows her to illustrate how death can be this extraordinary and ludicrous and disabling event that still exists in the midst of everyday life. So although the heroine in this story is literally sick with grief, she has to find a way to move on and to say goodbye. And so much of this story is about her learning how to say goodbye. And it's just devastating because it feels like an elegy both for first love and also for kind of the innocence of youth. And at long last, the book that inspired this whole video is Half a Lifelong Romance by Eileen Chang. And if all the other books on this list are sad, this book will rip your heart out and stomp all over it and then like throw it down the garbage disposal. Like, sad doesn't even begin to scratch the surface. I first heard about this book over on Matthew Sharapa's channel, and this book follows a young couple falling in love in Shanghai in the 1930s, but you know from the first page of the book that they are doomed and that something comes between them at some point, although you don't know what that is. And the first part of this book follows their sort of tentative courtship, and it was really quite charming and sweet to watch these two people falling in love, and they have really cute banter and they tease each other, but you also have this sense of foreboding because you know that things ultimately don't work out. And so whenever there's a misunderstanding between the characters or whenever they have an argument, you just feel this sense of dread, like, is this it? And then without giving too much away, about halfway through this book, the story just takes a turn, like a nightmarish, horrifying, shocking turn that separates these two characters, sends them down different paths, and they don't meet again for several years. And it's crushing. It's like so sad. I don't even know how to articulate it. Like, I don't usually verbally engage with books when I'm reading them, but while I was reading this book, I was just like, no, like, this can't be happening. And to just twist the knife a little bit further, Eileen Chang surrounds this central doomed love story with other narrative threads that deal with thwarted love, impossible love, unrequited love, that really underscores how heartbreak and misunderstanding and missed connections are happening all the time and happening to all kinds of people. And in that way, this book is kind of a meditation on the indifference of fate and the cruelty of circumstances. And above all, it's really about the inability to reclaim lost time and the impossibility of going back. It will just wreck you. Like, I hated this book, but I loved it. It was so good. It's one of my new favorites. So I really recommend it, with the caveat that there are some really brutal moments in this book. Those are some of my favorite sad love stories. If you have your own recommendations for sad love stories, please leave them in the comments below, because I am always on the lookout for books that will just, you know, pulverize the heart. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time. Bye!